The year is 1825. The place? A wild, untamed wilderness stretching from the soaring peaks of the Rockies to the unforgiving deserts of the Great Basin. This is a land of both breathtaking beauty and brutal hardship, a world of deep solitude and sudden violent danger. And in this land, a unique breed of men carved out an existence on the razor's edge of survival: the mountain men. They weren't just trappers chasing fortunes in beaver pelts. They were pioneers, self-made cartographers charting a land unknown to the outside world, and above all, they were masters of the unforgiving wild. To survive the long, desolate winters, to travel hundreds of miles from any settlement, they needed more than courage and a keen eye. They needed to solve a problem that plagues even us today: how to keep food from spoiling. This isn't just a story about meat. It's a story about ingenuity, resilience, and the lost art of survival. This is the tale of how a handful of men, armed with nothing but ancient wisdom and the raw resources of the land, preserved meat for years without a single refrigerator. Chapter 1. The Feast and the Clock. Imagine the scene. The sun, a smear of molten gold and deep violet, begins its final retreat behind the jagged, snow-capped peaks. The air, crisp and cold enough to sting your lungs, is thick with the raw, earthy scent of pine and the intoxicating aroma of a fresh kill. The hunt is over. The immediate danger has passed. Now, with the heavy labor of the initial butchering complete, the men gather around a crackling fire. It's a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. The smell of elk sizzling over the flames is a promise of warmth and sustenance. Faces, weathered and scarred by sun and wind, are illuminated by the dancing light, softened by shared laughter and the camaraderie that comes from facing down the wild together. For these precious hours, the world is reduced to the comfort of the fire, the rich taste of a feast, and the quiet satisfaction of a full belly. But as the final haunch of meat is carved, and the fire dwindles to a bed of glowing embers, a new reality begins to set in. The wilderness is a beautiful but unforgiving place, and it demands constant vigilance. An invisible adversary has already entered the camp, a silent, relentless thief. The clock is ticking. For us, in our modern world of refrigerators and freezers, the preservation of food is an afterthought. But for a mountain man, a freshly killed deer or buffalo was a finite resource on a brutal countdown to ruin. This massive bounty, this gift of life that could weigh hundreds of pounds, would in a matter of days begin its inevitable decay. The vibrant red of the muscle would dull, the glistening fat would lose its luster, and the air would subtly change, carrying the first, faint whispers of spoilage. This magnificent feast would become a banquet for scavengers, a breeding ground for invisible, deadly bacteria that could bring sickness and death. To waste this gift was not just a mistake, it was a death sentence. The mountain men knew this intimately. They understood the brutal, unforgiving laws of nature. Everything that lives must die, and everything that dies must decay. Their challenge wasn't just to hunt, but to conquer decay itself. It was a fight against the very nature of time and biology, a monumental problem that stood between them and survival through a long, desolate winter. Their methods weren't born from scientific journals or books on chemistry, but from generations of indigenous wisdom and their own hard-won experience. It was a practical, immediate science of survival, where the laboratory was the open air and the test subjects were their own stomachs. They had to find a way to stop the clock, to cheat the inevitable, and to make a fleeting bounty last not for a few days, but through the long, desolate months to come. This was the first and most critical test of a mountain man's ingenuity, and their very existence depended on solving it. The question wasn't just how they would eat, but how they would endure. Chapter 2. The Two Pillars of Preservation. Their strategy was brilliantly simple in its core principle, but complex in its flawless execution. It rested on two fundamental pillars: removing moisture and preventing bacterial growth. In a world without refrigeration, these weren't just methods. They were the absolute, non-negotiable commands of survival. The mountain men were masters of a technique that, in its essence, was the same as what ancient cultures had used for millennia: drying and smoking. But they adapted and perfected these ancient arts for the unforgiving, unpredictable realities of the high country. The first and most crucial step was to remove the water. Water is life, not just for us, but for the invisible organisms that would devour their food supply. A mountain man's world was either a feast or a famine, a lush oasis or a barren desert, and their meat needed to become a desert. With a seasoned hand, he would take the freshly butchered meat and, with the precision of a surgeon, slice it into long, thin strips. These weren't just random cuts. They were made with a deliberate purpose, often following the grain of the muscle, and no thicker than an inch. This wasn't just to make it easier to dry. It was to create a massive surface area, allowing the sun and wind to do their work as efficiently as possible. This process, a true art form, was known as making jerky, a term borrowed from the Quechua people, and it was their most reliable tool. He would build a simple, sturdy rack from branches and suspend these strips high above the ground, in a place with plenty of direct sunlight and a steady, cleansing breeze. He'd choose a site with the sun's full force, knowing that every hour of heat was an hour of preservation. The sun's radiant energy would work its alchemy, evaporating the moisture, while the relentless wind would carry it away, strand by strand. The meat, once soft and pliable, would slowly transform. Over the course of a few days, it would become hard, leathery, and infinitely more durable. It was food distilled to its most potent, essential form, a nutrient-dense product that could be carried in a saddlebag for weeks, even months, without a single thought of spoilage. This was survival, made portable, compact, and resilient. But what happened when the sun disappeared behind a shroud of clouds and a cold rain began to fall? They had a second, even more profound weapon in their arsenal. Chapter 3. The Smokehouse of the Wilderness. But the jerky alone wasn't always enough. Sometimes the relentless sun would vanish behind a shroud of thick gray clouds, and the high country would be swallowed by rain or heavy mists that made air drying impossible. In these moments, when moisture was the enemy and time was running out, a mountain man's instincts took over. He turned to the second pillar of his survival strategy: smoking. This wasn't just about adding flavor. It was about performing a profound, almost magical chemical defense. His smokehouse was as temporary and adaptable as he was. A simple tripod of sturdy poles, perhaps a few hides or woven branches draped over the top, created a low, controlled chamber. Inside, a low smoldering fire of green hardwoods, often hickory, oak, or alder, was carefully tended. The choice of wood was critical, for it was the smoke itself, not the heat, that was the key. He would hang the strips of meat from the ceiling of this makeshift structure, high enough to be bathed in smoke, but far enough from the fire to avoid being cooked. The smoke, thick with a cocktail of natural compounds like phenols and formaldehyde, became a powerful antimicrobial agent. It coated the meat, creating a protective barrier against bacteria and insects, a silent guardian that fought back against decay. This was a process that demanded patience, a deep understanding of fire, and an intimate knowledge of the land. The mountain man would tend to this fire for days, sometimes even weeks, adding just enough damp wood to keep the smoke flowing without flames erupting. He wasn't rushing. He was slowly, meticulously imbuing every fiber of the meat with the essence of preservation. The result was not just jerky, but a smoked jerky, a dark, leathery, and fragrant product that was far more durable than its air-dried counterpart. It was a testament to the power of nature, harnessed by human ingenuity, a product that could last for years if properly stored. But even with smoking, they had another, equally powerful secret weapon in their arsenal, a mineral that was their great preserver and a symbol of their precious connection to the outside world. Chapter 4. The Salt and the Cache Salt, the Great Preserver. In a land defined by hardship and scarcity, this was a commodity more valuable than gold. While not always readily available in the deep wilderness, when they could get it from traders or from the rare, natural salt licks, the mountain men used it with a reverence that spoke of its life-giving power. Salt wasn't just a seasoning. It was their most potent weapon against decay. It worked through a simple, brutal alchemy: osmosis. Salt not only draws out moisture, but it creates an environment so inhospitable that bacteria simply cannot survive. They would rub coarse, gritty salt deep into every fiber of the meat, creating a powerful, protective layer before the drying and smoking processes began. This created a product that was hard, salty, and a concentrated powerhouse of calories and nutrients. It was the flavor of the wild, a taste of sheer survival. But preservation was only half the battle. They also needed to protect their bounty from thieves, both animal and human. The wilderness was a competitive and dangerous place, and a cache of food could be the difference between life and death. So they would create what they called caches, hidden storage spots, often buried or concealed in hard-to-reach places. Building a cache was a masterful art form. It had to be secure from the relentless sniffing of bears, the cunning scavenging of wolverines, and the watchful eyes of rival trappers who were just as desperate. They would find a dry spot, perhaps a hollowed-out log or a deep, sheltered crevice in a rock face, and meticulously line it with branches and leaves to protect the contents from the damp earth. The preserved meat, the hard, salty jerky, the smoked strips, and the dense blocks of pemmican was carefully wrapped in hide and placed inside. The entire cache would then be concealed with painstaking care, leaving no visible trace for a passing eye. These caches were not just food stores. They were their personal pantries, their insurance policies against lean times, and their hope for the future. A well-stocked cache could mean the difference between a long, brutal winter of starvation and a season of enduring. A mountain man's success wasn't measured by the number of pelts he trapped, but by the number of caches he had waiting for him on the trail ahead, a testament to his foresight and his quiet confidence in his ability to conquer the wilderness. Chapter 5. Pemmican, the ultimate survival food. And then there was pemmican. This wasn't just preserved meat. It was the ultimate survival food, a concentrated energy bar forged in the heart of the wilderness. The name itself comes from the Cree word pemmican, meaning manufactured grease, and it was a staple of many indigenous cultures who had mastered the art of living off the land. The mountain men didn't invent pemmican, but they adopted it and made it their own, creating a food that was almost completely impervious to spoilage and a cornerstone of their legendary endurance. The process was a masterpiece of survival engineering, It began with the jerky itself, the hard, dried meat that was the foundation of their diet. They would take this jerky and, using a heavy, rounded stone, painstakingly pound it into a fine, powdery dust. This was a labor of patience and brute force, reducing the tough, leathery meat to a powder that resembled a rich brown flour. To this powder, they would add melted animal fat, or tallow, rendered from a bear or a buffalo. The melted tallow wasn't just a binder, it was a high-calorie fuel source and a powerful preservative, coating every particle of the meat and sealing it from the outside world. Often, a handful of wild berries, like chokecherries or service berries, were mixed in for flavor and a crucial dose of vitamins to ward off diseases like scurvy. The warm, dense mixture was then packed tightly into a rawhide bag, sealed, and allowed to cool. As the fat solidified, it encased the meat and berries, creating a product that was both calorie-dense and incredibly durable. Pemmican was not a meal to be savored. It was survival fuel. A man could carry a small bag of it and have the energy and stamina to trek for days, even weeks, on the trail. This simple, ingenious food was the true secret to the mountain man's legendary endurance, a testament to his ability to transform the raw resources of the land into a perfect and enduring solution. Chapter 6. The Art of the Cut, Maximizing Every Part. The process of preservation didn't begin with fire or salt. It began the very moment the animal fell. A mountain man's proficiency in butchering was as vital as his skill with a rifle, and it was a craft passed down through necessity and learned from the most patient of teachers, the indigenous people who had survived in this land for centuries. He understood the anatomy of a kill with an almost instinctive knowledge, and his work was swift and precise. The first priority was to bleed the animal and prevent contamination from the intestines. With a razor-sharp knife and a steady hand, he would carefully separate the hide from the flesh, a painstaking process that would later provide him with clothing, shelter, and a durable material for crafting bags. This wasn't just about getting the meat. It was about seeing the entire animal as a collection of resources, each with a vital purpose. The hide was painstakingly tanned, a process that could take weeks, but would yield strong, waterproof leather. The bones were not discarded. They were meticulously cleaned and fashioned into tools, needles for sewing, and scrapers for preparing other hides. The sinew, the tough, fibrous tissue connecting muscle to bone, was carefully stripped and dried. It would later be twisted into a thread stronger than any store-bought twine, used for mending clothes, repairing gear, and even for crafting bowstrings. But perhaps the most valuable part, aside from the muscle meat itself, was the fat. The mountain man would meticulously collect every piece of fat from the carcass and render it down over a fire. This golden liquid tallow was a precious commodity, serving as the core ingredient in pemmican, but also as a waterproofing agent for his leather, a base for making candles, and a valuable fuel source. The entire process was a testament to a philosophy of survival where nothing was wasted. The mountain man's ingenuity wasn't just about making food last. It was about ensuring that the gift of the hunt was honored and its life extended far beyond the immediate moment. It was a cycle of life and death, a dialogue with the land, and his hands were the final arbiters. Conclusion. The era of the mountain. Men has long since passed. The vast wilderness they knew has been charted, tamed, and crisscrossed with roads. But their legacy lives on, not just in the stories of their adventures, but in the lost wisdom of their survival. They were a testament to human ingenuity, to the power of observation, and to the profound understanding that to survive, you must first master the elements, and then master the clock. They didn't have refrigerators, but they had something far more valuable: a profound respect for the land and the ancient knowledge of how to live within it. Their methods of preservation were not just techniques. They were a philosophy of self-reliance, a silent promise to the future that no matter the hardship, they would not only endure, but thrive.